again, I wanted to really thank our partnership with the American Immigration Lawyers Association, as we've been partnering for their Citizenship Day for a couple of years now. We're very grateful as Maleo and as the Ya Es Hora Ciudadanía campaign to have aila on board and to really have the expertise of aila's attorneys on board to do these presentations and these trainings. I did want to remind everyone that for the most part in many of these workshops there will be attorneys assisting, so should you have any other questions that may arise after this presentation, feel free to definitely consult with your local attorneys. At this point, I wanted to go ahead and introduce Susan Timmons from aila, who will be introducing some of our speakers. And again, Susan, we really thank aila for your continued partnership and support with these efforts.
Thanks so much, Lizette. I really appreciate our partnership, too. This is the 4th year that aila has partnered with the Ya Es Hora Ciudadanía campaign on our National Citizenship Day, and it's just worked out beautifully. Our attorneys are able to provide sort of that expert legal advice, and I know that many of those of you on the call today are representatives from community-based organizations who are really putting on these events and making them happen. So we really appreciate you and the time that you're taking today to be a part of this webinar. So I just want to introduce our two speakers for today. We have Bridget Alvarez and Elizabeth L.A. Garvish. They are both aila attorneys in private practice. Bridget is in Los Angeles with the Southern California chapter, and Elizabeth is from Atlanta. And they've both been working on pro bono work, and specifically on Citizenship Day, for a number of years, and working in partnership with Ya Es Hora for a number of years as well. So we really have a treat today for them to give us this training, and I am going to turn it over now to Elizabeth to get us started.
Hi, thanks, Susan. Can everybody hear me okay? Guess so. Okay. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for, being part of the Citizenship Day event. It's growing and becoming even a better event every year. I've been involved in Atlanta for 5 years now, so and I keep doing it. And it's actually just ends up being, a way that we can help people, and also just a great fun event for everyone involved. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started. Let's see if I can. Okay. There we go. Why become a U.S. citizen? Well, there are lots of benefits to becoming a U.S. citizen. Of course, now you can actually, am I on the right? Yeah, I'm on the right side. You can actually now, as a U.S. citizen, of course, you can vote, which I think is really important now with all these Arizona-type immigration laws on the state level coming through. We've had a lot of bills going through, like at a state level in Georgia, and I know it's happening in other states where we really need those immigrant citizens to kind of come out and vote and defeat these ridiculous laws. Protection from loss of legal status. If you're get in trouble with the law, if you stay outside of the country for too long, you can lose your legal permanent resident status. As a citizen, you can't. You can travel and live abroad freely and do whatever you want. As a legal permanent resident, you are always in jeopardy of being, deported permanently from the United States if something did happen or go wrong. And, of course, you can get a U.S. passport. You have the right to hold office. You can work for the government. There's some high-level positions within the U.S. government and the U.S. military. You've got to have a high-level clearance, and you cannot hold one of these positions unless you are a U.S. citizen. And, of course, collecting public benefits, certain tax deductions, and finally the freedom from having to report your whereabouts to the USCIS every time you change addresses. Another benefit that really works with the long waiting times in the family-based immigration, you can petition for your immediate relatives and spouses, parents, and children, and immediately they can become U.S. permanent residents as well. Sisters and brothers, it takes a little bit longer, quite a bit longer. So now we've heard about all the great reasons that one should become a citizen. Now we have to decide whether you're eligible to become a citizen. Basically, to be eligible to become a U.S. citizen, you've got to have the physical presence requirement and permanent residence requirement. So you've got to be a permanent resident for 5 years or 3 years if you're married to a U.S. citizen. You've got to be physically present for half of that time. You can't have done any of the, voting, claiming you're a U.S. citizen, lying, certain crimes, tax issues, overdue taxes. Those are all going to be issues that you're going to have to address if one of these items on this eligibility checklist is answered yes. You can overcome a lot of these issues, especially like overdue taxes, if you refile your taxes that you need to be filed, or if you have a payment plan with the IRS, as long as you have proof that you're following through with your payment plan, as long as you've done the good thing to kind of take care of those issues, you are still eligible to apply. Of course, you must be 18 years of age. As I said previously, U.S. resident for 5 years or 3 years if you're married to a U.S. citizen. And, of course, you have to have been married and living together as husband and wife. Another requirement for men to become a U.S. citizen is selective service registration. Basically, this is required even for undocumented legal permanent residents as well. It's not required for certain non-immigrant categories. So if you're here as a non-immigrant student, a non-immigrant worker, you're not required to register for selective service. And basically, if you forgot to register or there's an issue down the road, there are ways that you can kind of get past that with U.S. citizenship on your application. Basically, we have people do an affidavit that says, oh, gosh, I was unaware of this requirement, and, if I had been aware of it, I certainly would have registered. And if a certain amount of time has passed, if you're now, you didn't register when you were 18, 26, and a certain amount of time has passed since then it's usually, it's forgivable. And we usually execute a waiver, like in all cases, and it's fairly easy to overcome that. But it's important to, if you are between 18 and 26 and you haven't registered, then you can always go on the site and register. Of course, for U.S. citizenship, you have to pass a civics test, and you've got to be able to read and write and speak English, and be a person of good moral character, and, of course, be continuously residing in the United States. Now, for continuous residence requirements, basically you cannot leave the U.S. for a period of longer than 6 months. So that kind of breaks the continuity of your physical presence in the U.S., so you have to restart the clock. So, for example, if you're in the U.S., Hector, who is a legal permanent resident for 7 years, but 3 years ago he took a business trip to Buenos Aires for 8 months. He broke the continuity of his physical presence, and he's got to start the clock all over again. In your workshops, you might see this. People are coming in and they maybe have their passport. You're gonna have to count the days, and you definitely want to make sure when you're in your workshops that you advise people applying early is instant denial. So they've got to be really sure and count down to that number of days. Especially, a lot of people come in and they've been traveling quite a bit in and out, so that's an important issue. And having the physical presence requirement. And of course, if you're married to a U.S. citizen, you're applying, then you only need to be present in the U.S. for 1.5 years. If you're not married to a U.S. citizen, it's 5 years and 2.5 years physical presence. Good moral character. It's subjective. Basically, that's just one of the requirements. Good moral character. So you've got to basically provide all the evidence of any criminal history that you've basically any kind kind of crime that you committed, any citation, any being detained by the police. So that includes speeding tickets and all of those kind of issues. Controlled substance, drug offenses, habitual drunkenness, drunk driving, prostitution, illegal gambling, child support payments. If you are a deadbeat dad or a deadbeat mom and you're behind on your child support or alimony, that also constitutes bad moral character and can result in denial of U.S. citizenship. And of course, lying to gain immigration benefits, or even voting in an election, or stating that you're a U.S. citizen when you're not, that can also be an issue, a good moral character issue, and gets you in trouble. And there's as we go through the form later on with Bridget, she'll go through the criminal, when they ask you about, they have several questions that they ask you about that pertain to your criminal offenses. And it's interesting how you're going to have to answer that, but you've got to look back at your, any arrests, any, being detained, any citations, and this will include, speeding tickets and everything. I had a client recently who was detained in college, like out at a party, detained by the police. I think they wanted to teach him a lesson. We answered the question, yes. There were no fingerprints, there's no record, there was nothing, but it's better safe than sorry to look back and kind of see, take the language in the question seriously. Now, for military, there's actually different requirements for active members in the military. President Bush actually passed an executive order in 2002 after 9/11, and it actually even service during hostilities is what it's called. If you're an active duty member of the armed forces, you can be naturalized even after just one day of active duty. You don't have to wait. It used to be just in peacetime, I believe it's 1 year. So for the military people, they have an added benefit. And the USCIS here in Atlanta, I think all over, they have an initiative that they want to fast track all the natz cases. That you'll get in, you'll do your basic training, and then they natz you immediately before you even deploy. And there's also benefits for posthumous naturalization in the military as well. You probably won't see that in your citizenship day drives, but it's always a good information to know. For asylees and refugees, asylees, it's 4 years from your date of admission, and then permanent residence is counted as of the date you're admitted as a refugee. Now, the requirements for English and civics, this is one that kind of scares people. They want to know what's the test like? What do I have to speak English? Well, this is one of my biggest lectures that I give. Usually I'll be at the Latin American Association because I speak Spanish here in Atlanta, and I'm usually, that's the biggest thing that I get is people are coming in speaking Spanish, and I'm like, do you speak English? Because if you cannot speak English now, you're going to throw away your filing fee of $680 because you need to go in and be able to have conversational English when you're having your interview. So you're going to be able to converse and answer questions with the adjudicator. Basically, it's fourth grade level, and the English test is comprised of reading one sentence and writing one sentence, like the tree is green. It's pretty elementary. But if you're not proficient in English, then you've got to we advise people to enroll in an English class and get up to that fourth grade level of proficiency. Now, there are exceptions. If you are 50 years old and you've been a permanent resident for at least 20 years, or 55 and been permanent resident for 15 years, then you are exempt from the English test. Sometimes for immigrants, it's just hard. It's just hard to learn, another language. I have clients, all their kids, 13 of them, they speak perfect English, but the parents it's just not in the cards for them to learn English at this point. But so you can wait until you've had this period of time as a permanent resident and then be eligible. The civics test is basically a list of 100 questions, and generally when the applicant is going to their biometrics appointment, they'll receive a DVD at their biometrics, and that's got, or CD, that has all the questions and a study book. But they're also available online, and they're available through Yasora as well. And basically what the officer will do is they'll ask you verbally up to 10 questions, or it could be only 6. So if you get the first 6 right, then you pass that civics exam. Okay. 5 steps to naturalization. Basically, what's the process? Of course, as we would do in our Citizenship Day events, fill out your application. This is what everyone, the volunteers and aila attorneys, will be helping applicants with: completing the application, answering the questions correctly, as well as telling them what to provide with the application: 2 photos, a copy of the front and back of their green card. If there's any criminal issues, they've got to provide, a certified transcript from the court for any of those issues, proof of marriage. If you're doing the 3-year U.S. citizenship application, just if you're married to a U.S. citizen, you've got to provide evidence of that. If you do not provide the proper documentation, you'll get a request for evidence from the USCIS, and then they'll specifically tell you what exactly you will need to provide. And I think now they're actually sending non-requests for evidence, but they're reminders of what to bring to the interview. We've been getting a lot of those. The next step is your biometrics. So basically have your fingerprints taken, and they do a background check, a name check for you, and then the next step is the interview, which you walk into your interview, bring your ID, bring your appointment notice, you go through the verbal English test unless you're exempt, and you go through the verbal civics test, and then they go through the application. And then the next is your oath of citizenship. So basically, if you're lucky, you can have a same-day ceremony, and I always advise clients to ask for that option if I'm not there with them. Hey, can I have a same-day ceremony? So sometimes if you have your morning interview, you'll be able to have a same-day ceremony and be sworn in on that very day that you're approved for citizenship. That's important, too. I had another client who basically between his interview and his oath, he got a speeding ticket, and so they wouldn't. And then on the day of the oath, he hadn't paid the ticket yet, and basically, or hadn't, gone through whatever, any kind of criminal issue. Even if it is a speeding ticket, you've got to resolve it before they can approve your citizenship. And basically, wouldn't allow him to be sworn in on that day. So I told him to slow down and stay out of trouble until his next ceremony. But it was kind of a hassle to reschedule and all that stuff. So you kind of got to be real careful about that. But if you request a same-day ceremony, then that works great. And then, I guess, of course, once you're a citizen, you need to get really involved in your local and state and national governments, and always vote and register to vote immediately. Apply for a U.S. passport, which you can find that online. Let people know of your name change, Social Security. Contact your elected officials and defeat all these bad Arizona type immigration laws. Now, volunteer training. Basically, I try to keep it really simple at our Citizenship Day events. We do an orientation in the morning of all the volunteers, and I kind of try to send out an email of what to expect. And generally, we'll have law students, community volunteers, other non-immigration lawyers, and then we'll have our immigration attorneys there as well to kind of be the quality control checkout people and the attorneys that you go to when you have an issue. We have certain people set out at checkout, and they will always review the application before anyone leaves. We have certain attorneys that will roam around, and people can raise their hand and get assistance at their table. But basically, I generally have a sign-in station, and I hand out. There's certain forms I hand out that are kind of pre-screening, getting all the information down before we put it on the application and discussing all that, so they can sign in and, sit down and fill out these, the forms with the information that's listed on the naturalization application. I don't really have any copy machines at our sites, so I always send people off, and then we have an instruction list, and we say, go copy your application. Make sure you copy it. Keep a copy, and make sure you send it FedEx or you send it certified. Then basically we have people go and sit down at the tables and get one-on-one assistance. I maybe have two people for one person, depending. Passport pictures, I ask people we have, they can either bring them with them or they can get them after. We don't have some sites would have a person there taking photographs, but they can just run to the Walgreens or the drugstore and get their passport photos. It's simple. We haven't had that. Now, the most important thing, though, is to check out quality control. I had one individual from a community organization here today told me that, I guess, someone gave a little bit of bad advice. The requirement, I don't think we even went over this, but the requirement of being present, you've got to be 90 days in the state where you're applying. So this individual just moved to Atlanta, and they actually filed and they were advised, or they heard, who knows, and they filed their application too early, and that was instantly denied. So you've got to have that quality control, and we try to make sure that, experienced immigration attorneys are at the checkout, and they review in depth the application and make sure that it's okay to go. And then you're handing this out to them to go on and file it on their own after they make a copy. We also have limited legal advice agreements that we sign with all of our individuals that come to the Citizenship Day events. So we're not representing them. We're only providing assistance. So if you can provide all of these workshop stations, that's wonderful. We kind of try to keep it simple here and rely on people, let people do that and kind of just do the nitty-gritty advice that we really need to do, but provide plenty of checklists that people know exactly what to do. And then if they're not ready, we always make sure we have a referral list of attorneys. If there's any kind of criminal issue that we really don't want to deal with, we refer them to attorneys. If there's any kind of issue that really, criminal is the main one, but if there's a physical presence issue, if there's child support, anything that is somewhere out of the complication, out of our comfort zone, we always want to refer that to an attorney and ask them to, seek legal assistance. Now, I guess I pass it over to Bridget to go over the N400.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for reviewing all of the eligibility requirements. That was very useful, and I think in this next section, you will all see how each of the issues that Elizabeth discussed can arise within the context of the application. So right now, we are going to go to slide 18. This is pretty self-explanatory. This is just so that the copies that we make and that the copy that is of the application that's in immigration's file is legible. A big note that Elizabeth said earlier, or to emphasize what Elizabeth said earlier, was that quality control is really important, but quality control also relies on information that you guys see on the front lines when you're filling out the application. So if there's any questions you have, perhaps let me turn up the volume on my phone. If you have any type of questions or concerns about an application, just grab a big Post-it and put it on that actual page and put your concern or describe it briefly. Or you can also raise your hand. I know here in LA when we do these citizenship workshops, attorneys are not only at a particular station, but we also are kind of roaming through the area where applications are getting filled out. So in case anyone has a question at that moment, one of us can meet with that person and try to answer the question right then and there. Moving on to the next slide, the only thing I want to mention here is copies of these documents are necessary to submit with the application. For the lawful permanent resident card, you want to make sure you get both sides. Some of the older cards have information on the back, not just on the front. Also, for the A number, the length of that number has varied over time. The older numbers are shorter, so what we're doing is adding zeros to the front, just like immigration does, because they're trying to standardize it as a 9-digit number. So if there's 8 digits in the number, just add a 0 in front. If there's 7 digits, just add 2 zeros, exactly like it's indicated on this slide. Time as a permanent resident. The best way to see this is actually on the next slide. These are the current versions. On the top is the current version of the lawful permanent resident card. It's actually green again, like it used to be several decades ago. You can find that date. It'll say resident since at the bottom. This card was created just last year. Prior to that, we had the white cards. Many people still have the white permanent resident cards. It also says resident since such and such a date. Prior to that, it shows up as black and white on the slide, but those cards are actually pink, and they'll say, A number. It'll say A number clearly on the front, and then on the back, it'll say date of admission, which is the date they became a permanent resident on the back. So just this slide is very useful for determining where to find that information on all the versions of residency cards we have now. So moving on to slide 24. This is the first part of the first page of the application. Part A, you're going to ask the person for their legal name and how it appears on their driver license or ID card. It might be different from the name that's on the permanent resident card, but if that's the name they're actually using, you want to put that down. Sometimes in Part B, there are things that are misspelled or sometimes shortened in ways that are odd, but for some reason they were printed out. The card was printed out that way, and so that's why there could be a discrepancy between the driver license or the state ID card and the lawful permanent residency card. So just put the names down exactly as they're listed on the identifications. If the person has used any other names, such as if the person is married right now and their single name, we should put that down. And on the names on any state identifications that differ from the permanent residency card, we want to add those as well, just to make sure, confirm with immigration that we're not trying to hide an alias or anything like that. Moving forward, this is the bottom of the first page. When someone submits an application for citizenship, there is the option to get a 2-for-1 deal, or you can apply for citizenship and also apply for a legal name change, so that the certificate that is issued once someone attends the oath of the loyalty oath and gets their certificate will actually be the new legal name. For example, I had a client who his first name was Brigido, which is actually my name in Spanish, a male version. And I asked, that's a great name. Are you going to keep it? And he said, no, I'm going to change my name to Jerry. So we changed his name to Jerry using this exact question. As Elizabeth mentioned, under Part 2, there is a 5-year or 3-year requirement. If you've been married to a U.S. citizen for the last 3 years, you'll include proof of marriage and the spouse's proof of citizenship to show that you're eligible for the faster time period. And there's actually a 3-month time window of eligibility when even though you haven't completed the 5 years or the 3 years, at 4 years and 9 months or at 2 years and 9 months, you can actually submit your application, assuming that there's no other problems. Let me see. Moving on to the next slide, slide 26. We'll see the Social Security number, date of birth, date you became a permanent resident. You can refer back to the other slide regarding how to locate that information. Country of birth, country of nationality. The person should bring their passport as well. So just double check that. If Part F, if either of the parents are U.S. citizens, be sure to make a note, leave a Post-it, and if that applies, the thing is that the person could already be a U.S. citizen through acquired or derivative citizenship, and might not have to submit this form, but rather an N-600. Current marital status. Sometimes people will say, "Oh, I'm married in my country, but we haven't been together for many, many years. We've been separated for a long time." They're still legally married, even though they married outside of the U.S. That marriage is still valid here, so that is something you want to double check with each applicant. Part H, an important thing to mention, at least in Los Angeles, there's been a lot of fraud with this particular question, to tell people that, oh yes, you can get a doctor's letter and then you don't have to take the test in English, or you can avoid the civics exam. Generally, here in LA, these are denied due to the high incidence of fraud. Although, there's with several exceptions. I had a client who was HIV positive and had advanced dementia. His N-648 was approved, but it wasn't just a doctor's letter. It was reams of medical information, his medical records, and demonstrated proof that he could just not remember or retain new information. So if someone is telling you that they heard that they could just get a doctor's letter, it's generally not true. You want to raise your hand and talk to an attorney, or make a note of it and let an attorney know, so that the attorney can question them more closely about the disability or impairment. Moving on. This section is self-explanatory. Just put their home address, and then they can put an additional mailing address if they don't trust the mail coming to their home, or if they want someone else to receive it. On Part 5, questions A through G are just information that they double-check with the FBI to make sure it's the actual applicant and not someone else. Part 6 is a confirmation that the person has been living in the United States for the past 5 years. So that's why they ask for the residence history. On the next slide, at slide 29, there's also an employment history. Even if there have been periods, especially now during these economic times, if there have been periods of unemployment where the person was not working for some reason or another, the applicant should be prepared to answer questions regarding how they supported themselves or who was supporting them during those periods. Also include periods when the person was a student. If they were a full-time student, that should be included as well. And again, as the slide says, if you don't have the exact dates, at least put the month and the year. Moving on. There's a lot of confusion in this section because the questions are phrased a little oddly, and because they're put next to each other, sometimes people get confused about how completely to answer. The first questions, A and B, deal with trips during the past 5 years only. However, question C deals with all of the trips that someone has taken since becoming a lawful permanent resident. So if someone has been a lawful permanent resident for 20 years, you're going back with them over the past 20 years over all of their trips. And when I say trips, we mean trips of 24 hours or more. So day trips to Mexicali to go buy a piñata, like those do not count because they don't last for more than 24 hours. A lot of people, especially folks who have been lawful permanent residents for many, many years, they will not know the exact date. They'll come back with a car, and they won't have a stamp in their passport. So if they can best approximate the times of those trips, that would be great. Even if you can put something, as it's shown on the bottom of the slide, from August 2004 to September 2004, and an approximation of how many days outside of the country, that's perfectly adequate. However, if there's trips that lasted 6 months or more, that's an issue that's a red flag issue, and you want to talk to an attorney about that. For example, I had a client, not a client, but someone I met at a clinic who had been spending, she was a grandmother, and had been spending every 6 months in El Salvador with her children, and then would come to the United States and spend 6 months with the grandchildren. Now, technically not a big deal. However, people like that are normally going to get stopped at the border because their Border Patrol is going to think that they're no longer living in the United States, so they're actually abandoning residence due to the large number of months that she's spending outside of the country each year. So that's someone who we want to talk to an attorney and make sure that the person is indeed eligible, perhaps wait a while before they actually submit the application for citizenship until she can show that she has been living, or the applicant has been living, rather, in the United States continuously. Also, on the next slide is where they start asking questions about marital history. Now, it's seemingly innocuous. However, there's a lot of people who have not admitted prior marriages because they thought, oh, well, I was married in my country, but we've been separated for 20 years, and now she's with someone else. We have to count all of the marriages everywhere, anywhere in the world. So if the person got married in Sierra Leone and then moved to Guatemala and got married there, we have to keep track or keep an accurate count of all the marriages that have occurred for the applicant. On Part 8, there is a question, Part E, that says if your spouse is not a U.S. citizen. A lot of people are concerned, a lot of applicants are concerned about giving information and revealing that their spouse is undocumented. Now, the CIS, or the Citizenship and Immigration Services, does not have the time nor the human resources to knock on people's doors and, question the undocumented spouses of citizenship applicants. At least here in LA, that has not been their priority at all. And really, we don't want to make any misrepresentations on this application. So if the person is married and they're married to someone who's undocumented or to someone who came in on a visa 10 years ago and is still here, that is not something that's going to hurt their application for citizenship and not something that is going to hurt or harm their spouse. Moving on to slide 33. If you were married before, provide the following information about the prior spouse. This is the section where immigration makes sure that the previous marriages were properly resolved through death, divorce, annulment prior to the current marriage. There's quite a few people who were beneficiaries of family petitions that were submitted by their parents when their parents were lawful permanent residents, and then these folks got married. And they got married while their parents were lawful permanent residents. So under the law, you lose your right to get a green card through that family petition upon marriage. However, they go to the interview, they end up lying about their marital status, and then later on, several years later, they apply for citizenship, and then the risk is not only that they'll get denied, but that they'll also get their green card taken away if they don't qualify for a waiver before an immigration judge. So again, this is why it's important to track each marriage for the applicant, and if there's any problems or any concerns about how the person's previous marriage was not dissolved or annulled prior to the current marriage, then we should talk about that with an attorney or with the quality control folks. Elizabeth, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that section. Okay. Moving on to slide 34. This is where immigration is asking for information about children, biological children, of course, whether they have papers or not, children that are born out of wedlock, children who are adopted. We don't have to include stepchildren who are not legally adopted. The question that's going to arise here, if there's an applicant for citizenship and the children do not live with the applicant, then there will always be questions from immigration about where the proof of child support payments is, especially if the children are under 18. If they're over 18, they're probably not going to ask for this. But I always recommend to my clients to have something in writing in terms of proof that proof of child support, such as money order receipts, cash checks at the actual interview. So there's no doubt in the officer's mind that the applicant has failed to support their dependents. Okay, on part 10, additional questions. These are actually all red flag issues on this page. False claims to U.S. citizenship, question 1. The other day I had a case where one of my clients was stopped at the border. He showed a California ID, and he applied for asylum. He was put into removal proceedings, and it shows up in his FBI record check, which is the second part of this application process, is that you'll get sent to an application support center where they'll take your fingerprints and they'll run an FBI check. There was something that showed up on his FBI record that he had made an oral false claim to U.S. citizenship. Now, when he was in removal proceedings, the allegation that he had made a false claim and the charge regarding the false claim were withdrawn. And so we pulled those documents from the court file and we brought them to the interview, because even though the officer had or knew that my client was granted asylum, he still wanted proof that those charges were withdrawn and that they were not actually sustained, because they did come up in the FBI. So these are things that could be highly problematic. So make sure to review with the applicant if they've ever registered to vote, if they've ever voted. A lot of folks in high school will register because they won't necessarily know, and people come to high school to register people to vote. So just really be careful with these questions. And if there's any yeses, then talk to one of the attorneys. The last question, have you ever been declared legally incompetent? Just to make sure that the applicant will understand and be conscientious of taking the oath of loyalty to this country. Moving on to additional questions. On this page, the Immigration Service is just looking for terrorist groups or communist organizations. It's fine to put, the church that you belong to, community groups, any political groups that you're a part of. If there's any questions, talk to an attorney, but it's generally fine. On the next page, these are issues that could also be problematic. Whether someone has been involved in any type of coup, question number 10. Number 11, if they've ever persecuted any person because of race, religion, national origin, membership in a particular social group or political opinion. This could come up if there's issues regarding previous military service. Someone at a firm I used to work at, he had worked in intelligence in El Salvador, and he'd been trained at the School of the Americas. Now, this was during the 80s, so he was very likely involved in persecution. So I don't know. He wasn't my direct client, so I don't know if he actually ended up applying for citizenship. But that is something that could arise for applicants here, is if they have previous military service. They could have, not necessarily, but they could have been involved in persecution depending on the circumstances. And if you have any questions, just speak to an attorney. Number 12, if they've ever been participated directly or indirectly with Nazis. It's a smaller and smaller group, but again, this group of people cannot naturalize. And continuous residence, 13 and 14, if they've ever failed to file taxes because they were not only non-residents, but that they were not living in the country. The next page deals with good moral character. This is something that we want to be especially careful with, because Immigration Service is always looking for people who are trying to conceal, or who they think are trying to conceal their criminal history. And there's a lot of applicants who are just confused about what to put. Many people will say, oh, well, I didn't get handcuffed and they didn't take me away in a police car. However, any type of questioning or stops, we want to be very cautious and admit that as an arrest, because it will likely show up as an arrest on their FBI. A former client of mine was questioned regarding a murder that she witnessed, and it shows up as an arrest on her FBI report. We had to show that she was just questioned and, not investigated as a perpetrator, but still it came up on her own criminal record as an arrest. The question 15, have you ever committed a crime or offense for which you were not arrested? That question, I read it as, someone is wanting to confess something, but that they didn't get caught. Number 16 is, have you ever been arrested, cited, or detained? Now, this is where we want to be overly inclusive. Again, any stops or questioning by any authority, whether they be local police, border patrol, or immigration, this is something that we want to admit. Now, it could be that they were stopped, like my former client, or questioned, but were never charged. So if there's any type of arrest history, normally the person will have some type of documents from court showing whether or not, and that would show whether or not they were charged with committing any crime or offense. Have you ever been convicted of a crime or offense? Another confusing question. Only a docket sheet or a summary of the actual case, a certified summary of the case, will let you know whether or not the case was dismissed or the charges were dropped. A lot of people will say, the case was taken off my record, and I'm fine now. However, there's state law and state rehabilitative relief programs that are not necessarily recognized in the same way by immigration law. Immigration law is federal. So if someone says, I don't have any more convictions because they were all erased from my record, we need to ask to see those documents. The attorneys need to see those documents to make sure that we can answer no to something like that. Like Elizabeth said, especially on this page, it's better safe than sorry. We'd rather admit things than have immigration ask us at the interview, well, you knew this, why didn't you admit it earlier? On the next slide, slide 39, there's a little chart at the top, and that's where you'll especially need to have those docket sheets, those certified docket sheets that include the arrest date, when charges were filed, what charges were filed, and how they were ultimately resolved, and where. All that information will come from the court documents. If you have any question on how to read them, because they can sometimes be really confusing, just flag an attorney. Questions 22, 23, 24. Have you ever been an alcoholic, prostitute, a drug trafficker, a bigamist, someone who helped smuggle someone in the country, participated in illegal gambling, or failed to support your dependents? Now, a lot, at least here in California, there's a few people who have been stopped at the border, and the car was taken because someone in the car was undocumented. So when you hear something like that, if someone's saying, they took my car once, but I wasn't trying to bring anyone in, you want to talk to an attorney about that, about exactly what happened, because there could be other steps that we have to take before filing citizenship to make sure that the person was never actually charged of or accused of what they call alien smuggling. Again, 23 and 24, have you ever lied or given false information to a U.S. government official? When someone applies for Citizenship and Immigration Services will actually look at the entire application, not just for citizenship, but since the person applied for adjustment. They're looking at the entire file to see if there's anything that has gone on or any type of misrepresentation in the application process. Moving on, if this section, Part E, regarding removal, exclusion, and deportation proceedings, again, there's a lot of different types of deportations and voluntary departures, things that could happen in this area. So if anyone says, I got turned away at the border in 1994 because I had a birth certificate, a U.S. citizen birth certificate of my cousin, anything like that, you want to talk to an attorney and so that they can get more information and more closely question the person, because a lot of people are confused about what counts and what doesn't count as a deportation. And there's also people who have been to immigration court and they won their cases. So even though proceedings are not currently pending against them, they have applied for relief from removal, exclusion, or deportation, as it says in question 28. So you want to make sure that we answer those questions correctly. Military service, they're looking for draft dodgers in this question, or in that series of questions. Moving on to slide 41, selective service. Any men who have lived in the United States between ages 18 to 26, they want to make sure that they've registered for selective service or for the draft. If the applicant is male and under 26, they must register before applying. They can register online at sss.gov, as it says on the slide. And between 26 to 30, they might not be able to naturalize until they turn 31. So talk to one of the attorneys at your particular site. If they're over 31, then we can submit a letter that says, look, I'm sorry, I didn't know why, I didn't know that I had to register, whatever circumstances are applicable to them. And if the applicant did register but no longer has the card, which is very common, you can look it up easily at the same website, the sss.gov, and print it out and take that number to the actual interview. Now, the oath requirements from questions 34 to 39, most people will say yes, that they're willing to support the Constitution, understand the oath, take the oath, and willing to bear arms. There will be a small percentage, depending on your area, where there's a bona fide religious belief for question 37 about not bearing arms, not participating in violence to defend the country. For example, Jehovah's Witnesses will want to answer no to this question. That's perfectly acceptable. What they need to do at the actual interview is take a copy of an original letter from their temple, kingdom hall, or whatever is applicable, on letterhead from the actual place of worship that says this person is a member of this particular religion, and as a religion, we do not support participating in acts of violence. So, and just kind of explains that, and that should be no problem. For slide 42, the applicant will sign. The person who prepares the application will print and sign their name as well. From what I understand, there's differences amongst the offices as to what to put in terms of the firm or organization and the address. So check with your volunteer coordinator the day of the event as to what organization you should put, whether it's NALEO or the local NALEO office, or aila Citizenship Day, or whatever is applicable for your area. Slide 43, that's actually the very end of the application. This part should not be completed until the applicant is before the officer, because they are going to ask them to sign it actually at the interview. And I think we're going to leave the rest for our moderator for additional tips and any additional information about participating in citizenship days.
Sure. Thank you, Bridget and Elizabeth. This is Lisa again. On your screen, you'll find some websites that we recommend that folks visit, which include the N400 application. For folks that will be participating in various aila days or any workshops locally, we recommend that you take a quick peek at the N400 application, and once you have this PowerPoint, you can actually kind of compare the notes to the actual physical application. So we suggest you download that ahead of time and take a look at it so that you can be prepared for the workshops. There is a USCIS website as well that has tons of useful information. They actually have a resource area as well, so that you can inform yourself on the actual naturalization process, but also see what other resources they have available for you as either a community leader, organization, or as a local attorney. Some other additional tips is inform the volunteer coordinator of the exact hours you will be able to assist on the day of the workshop. So for folks that are actually going to be volunteering, we suggest that you work very closely with your organizations or with your coordinator or the attorney that you're working closely with so that they know the exact times. I know here in LA, it's always very helpful to know when we have the most volunteers available, because we tend to get a very high turnout during the early hours of the workshop. So we kind of assess the distribution of volunteers according to their availability. And lastly, enjoy the experience, and know that when you're helping someone fill out this application, you're helping someone in the community get on the pathway towards U.S. citizenship. For them, it means more than just you volunteering on that Saturday or on that Sunday. It really is a life-changing experience for them, and you're essentially getting them on the pathway to full incorporation of the American political process, in essence, and something that many of our community folks have been waiting from 5 to 30 years. So we thank you and congratulate you for really making a difference in your community and really going out there and providing the service that would otherwise not be available. And for a lot of our attorney friends and our attorney volunteers, we thank you as well, because this is a service that is not readily available to the community, and that it's very hard for our community to access low bono and pro bono services. So this is a huge assistance for them. So we thank you as well. Here's some information on our actual Ya Es Hora Ciudadanía campaign, some of the resources we have available, things you can download. You can access some tools and resources that we have available in our download section. When you get a recording of this webinar, you can actually click on the link. I'm not sure if it's hyperlinked now. You can actually also download a citizenship guide that we have available in both English and Spanish. I don't know if any of you folks saw some page numbers in some of the initial slides, and that was referencing back to the citizenship guide and where you can actually find the information on the guide. So feel free to download those guides. Feel free to produce them en masse in your local community. The more resources, the merrier for our community. And disseminate information about the importance of citizenship. We actually have a bilingual hotline. It's 1-888-839-8682, which is active now. It's active from 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So we suggest folks to give out that number freely. We'll be answering those calls here, and we have operators taking those calls again from 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. Pacific. We also have a website, which is www.yaeshora.info, where the public can not only get access information to the actual process, but folks that are community leaders that do belong to community-based organizations or even attorneys can actually download resources as well. And also, if you want to volunteer at a workshop near you, we are always posting events on our website, so there's the actual URL. So not only on aila Citizenship Day, but any other day that folks want to volunteer, we have events available, and we can definitely connect you. And to become a partner of the actual Ya Es Hora campaign and be listed as a partner and have your services listed on our website and our hotline, you can email me. There's my email there. It's alescobedo@naleo.org, and we'll get you a partnership agreement, and we'll set you up and start referring folks to your local organizations. I'm going to go to this next slide that has the contact information for both myself and the American Immigration Lawyers Association and Susan. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over actually to my colleague Elisa to go over folks that have questions.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elisa Sequeira. I'm the program manager with the Naleo Educational Fund Civic Engagement Department, and I'll be conducting the Q&A session. Lucette, if you could please stop the recording. And
thank you. Please stand by.